I'm going to introduce you now to Leo Casey. And Leo is also argued that innovation in teaching and professional practice may be regarded in terms of diffusion. So, Leo is currently Director of the Centre for Research and Innovation in Learning and Teaching at the National College of Ireland. He had a previous career in educational television and e-learning production. His research interests are on the interface between technology and learning, and that's a very important interface and certainly builds on from what Dr. Murphy and Michael and Neil were talking about this morning. He's also Program Director of the Postgraduate Diploma and Master of Arts in Learning and Teaching at the National College of Ireland.
So I'm going to talk about technology and an aspect of it that I think often gets overlooked. Often we look at the technology itself and we miss the impact of that technology on society, on how we do things, and we call these practices. So I'm looking at the way in which we change our practices over time, and in particular practices related to technology, innovation in learning and teaching. And we probably all recognize this is the kind of pattern where new ideas and possibilities get tabled at events like this, and we hear about them and we go back and we get buzzed up. And then also in many of our organizations we have pockets of innovation where champions and pioneers are doing something new and different, and we're all the time listening to what they're doing. And the third one is that we get to a point where the practice has changed completely over time. And often that last part of it is the big goal that we have, but it's often the most difficult to achieve. And the mechanism which this kind of transformation takes place, we could describe as diffusion. Certainly it's the one that we're going to talk about here. And just examples from different domains of diffusion. And the first one here I have is continental quilts. Now I think that's a very interesting example because if you go to France or Germany or any other place, they call them duvets. And we call them duvets if you're young enough, but if you're my age, we call it a continental quilt, because this was a bright idea that originated on the continent. And I always tell the story, Maura's here, my wife Maura, at one point in the 1980s, we were visiting a friend of ours, and he had a school in Bavaria, and he was showing us around the dormitories, and Maura said, "That's fantastic, you have continental quilts." And he said, "What? This is the continent." And the other one that we probably know about, if we're old enough, is flipping dinner time. Because people say, when we were growing up, our dinner was our lunch. And then it became very trendy to have dinner in the evening. And what's interesting here is these are innovations of our practice, the way we do things, the way we carry on our activities. And another one was text messaging. I'm kind of going a little bit closer to a technology-driven innovation. But the fact that the existence of text messaging is different from the innovation of text messaging. So, I mean, it's commonly noted that the Irish people were very, very, very high users of text messaging, probably to do with economic knowledge, young people, etc., and things like that. And then this last one here is interesting. Someone said one time, this would be a nice thing to do, ICD, in relation to text messaging, small innovation, that's what people say, in case of emergency, who should. So these innovations are either big or smaller innovations. Some of them catch on, some of them don't. And here's one as well, that might be a bit of a surprise, that in North America, our typical kind of imagery of Great Plains Native Americans on a horse. And we say, there must have been centuries and thousands of years, of good practices for horses. The horses were introduced by the Spanish when they came into Mexico and gradually diffused their way up. So the iPad of the Great Plains was a horse. And there were people going around saying, I have a horse here, look what I can do with it, and probably conferences like this, So you can see how it diffused its way right up into Canada. So we also have an assumption here that we could say, trying to untangle the whole diffusion dilemma, which is if the innovation is good enough, it's going to catch on, and poor ones don't catch on. So you think that's the logical way in which you think about it. Well, here's an innovation. It's a keyboard. It was designed by an educational psychologist, and it's a pretty smart keyboard because these here are the vowels A, O, E, U, I, very frequently used, and then the consonants, which are used less frequently, are more separated from the centre bar. Dvorak, who developed this, said this is fantastic. The original keyboard QWERTY layout was designed to slow down typing because the keys kept clanging together. This is much better. And on ease of use, on many characteristics, it should catch on. But hands up, anyone's got one of these keyboards? And this was developed, I think, in the 40s or 50s. It's pretty old, but it has never caught on. Nobody's going to catch it on. And yet, it's a very good innovation. So, a way of looking at it, a good kind of a theoretical way of looking at it, was proposed by Everett Rogers. And that's the book there, Diffusion and Innovation. It's a really interesting book. It's in its 6th edition. First published in the 70s, and Everett Rogers was not an educational technologist or anything like that. In fact, his background was an area called agricultural extension, and he was interested initially in why farmers did some things in innovation and not others, and how innovation worked in farming practices, particularly in post-Depression North America. He described these processes, and he conducted quite a lot of research on it and examined many different case studies. And essentially, he modeled diffusion something like this, which is a drop of water falling, drop falling in water. There's a disturbance, something happening. That's going to be relevant. That's the innovation on the technology itself. Then there's how it's communicated, and there's a time, and then the mechanisms of communication, that these were the elements. And his major work was analysing hybrid corn. So I know people are now looking at it and saying, am I in the right place here? Hybrid corn in the 1930s and 40s in the US was developed in the land-grant universities. And it was a big benefit over the standard corn. It was easier to harvest, higher yields, more drought resistant, more pest resistant. But it had a characteristic that you couldn't buy the seed and take the seed from your previous year's crops. Every year you had to buy a new bag of seed for your hybrid corn. A requirement to change innovation by the practitioner. And what Everett found was that innovation among populations tends to follow this kind of pattern. And that you find out in many innovations. And some of you may be familiar with it. The innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. The interesting part of this is here. And many of you in this room are probably over here. And you might know some people here, but you can see if you just do the basic maths that the area under the graph will be the numbers of people who have changed. So you're trying to get that whole bell curve in the middle to switch over and make a change. And don't mind the laggards, because if you move at their pace, you'll never change anything. And what Everett found in terms of hybrid corn was a pattern like this. Now, these are Iowa, Wisconsin, Kentucky, and here in the 30s, these would be like if you took that previous graph and started adding this with the early adopters, then there's a big kind of grouping here in the middle. So you can see Iowa And he found that it was radiating out from the pockets of innovation, and that there was a process that he could describe that was going on, that farmers were flipping over into their hybrid corn strategy. And he outlined the characteristics of that process in terms of these 5 characteristics, and used some complex stats and maths as well to build a model, which I'm not going to go into details on, but I want to just focus on this subset here, which reads as the attributes of an innovation. And in the attributes, we have relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, trialability, and observability. I think these are 5 very important ideas when it comes to technology innovation in learning and teaching in school and institution settings. Notice, by the way, it's the perceived attributes, not the attributes themselves. It doesn't matter what the iPad does. It doesn't matter what the Surface does. What only matters is how you perceive what they can do. And so I always put the I out there just to remind us that it's about the perception of the innovation. And so in terms of relative advantage, almost all of the innovators and early adopters speak about relative advantage. That's the big sell. Look what you can do. Look what could happen if you began to use this. And it's an easy sell, but people get it. But it's not. It's one of 4 or 5 elements that go into making the change. So it often gets overemphasized, in my opinion. But it's why something is better. Hybrid corn better than standard corn, on a horse better than not on a horse. Compatibility is the degree to which an innovation is perceived as being consistent with your existing values, experiences, and the needs of potential adopters. This is a really important one in school settings. So, for example, all the kind of good stuff that you could do with, let's say, a wireless enabled classroom or something like that, often it's incompatible with the 40-minute class period, or with the not available immediately before or immediately after to clean up, etc., things like that. So that compatibility is a significant factor, and we should kind of place more emphasis on that. Complexity also, the degree to which the innovation is perceived as difficult to understand and use. Notice again the I, it's about the perception of complexity. So telling people, oh, that's easy, actually sometimes increases their sense of bewilderment with the technology. And again, technology advocates, focus on the perceived uplift and ease with which it can be used. To people who find it difficult, they actually feel not only that they don't see it as easy, but that they must be somehow deficient because they don't see it as easy. So important one to work on. This also is hugely significant for classroom and school settings. It's trialability. The hybrid corn switchover people, they all tried it for 1 year with a small section of 1 field. And when the farmer was happy that it would work, they switched the whole crop. Teachers find it difficult to try out innovative practices in classroom settings. The logistics, the sense of inquiry that you would need with your students in order to try new practices. So trialability is a big barrier in a lot of innovation agendas. Observability is the degree to which we see others, particularly our peers, being successful in its implementation. And this goes back again, the farmer in the fields next sees the hybrid, what type of corn is that, how do you, what's your yield, etc., and things like that. And we see that when we come close up to others using the innovation, that this observability factor is very important. Again, it often occurs in school settings that although people meet in staff rooms, that the classroom activities are happening in enclosed spaces, and there's kind of low levels of observability and sharing in practice. Now, another idea which Everett would have espoused is this idea of reinvention. And I think, again, this is quite important. for school and education settings. At a certain point in time, in let's say 1998 or 9, I couldn't make up my mind this morning, we switched our currency from pounds to euro. It was not an innovation, not a diffusive process. We went to bed one night with one currency, woke up the following day with another currency. And what we had to do was adapt to the new setting. And often you find studies which are sometimes classified as technology adaptation studies. So again, you probably know that the Guards, for example, use a system called Pulse. And now, that's the system for management of kind of crime, and that you work to that system. You can't take that system and modify it and say, oh, I'm doing that around my mobile devices, we well know, and all the other bits and pieces. We have very low levels of reusability or adaptability for these kind of big technical infrastructures. In contrast, the use of technology in schools is constantly being reinvented by teachers and even by students. So something that's developed for one purpose gets used by them for a completely different purpose. And they, rather than adapting to the technology, they take the technology and adopt the technology and the practices around that technology. So this notion of reinvention, very important, powerful plus indicator for diffusion in these contexts. It's not the people who change necessarily, but the innovations themselves. And so reinventability was added in later as something that would be important to look at if we were looking at a model for diffusion. So in summary then, innovations that are perceived by individuals as having greater relative advantage, compatibility, trialability, observability, reinventability, and less complexity will be adapted more rapidly than other innovations. This model here, I'm sure you've met it before. This is the kind of stages or levels of usage and adoption, substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. If we add that in at the end, we have like a table like this one here, where we can look at ideas around innovative practices in classrooms. Here we have using a digital stopwatch for group work. And then we'd say, well, what's the relative advantage? Not a lot, you have to say, but it's probably fairly compatible and it's not too complex. I could try it out. You can see you could get all of that. And you can see at the end as well that it's more like a substitution for the standard watch, rather than something more complex. And then going down through here, students make a video, student Twitter accounts, flipping the classroom. So with flipping the classroom, we're certainly here in redefinition, a much more kind of complicated and complex practice transformation. But we would then have to look at it in terms of relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, etc. And with this model is a roadmap for how we could support schools in developing their innovative practices. Because again, often we emphasize relative advantage, whereas if we set up sites for trialability and familiarization that people used to complexity, means and mechanisms for observability, that the diffusion will be more likely to be successful. Thank you.